Almost exactly 13 years ago, I stood here and, as your interim minister, said goodbye. It was the Sunday before Paul Tellstrom arrived to begin serving as your senior pastor. So there just seemed to be a certain symmetry, at least, for me to fill this spot again on the Sunday after Paul has ended his long and fruitful ministry with us. 13 years ago, I wanted to encourage you as you moved into a new and unknown stage in your common life. I also offered a few suggestions about how to enter this new relationship and help it to work well. Then I left. When Mary and I returned to Southern California almost 4 years ago, and Paul welcomed, all of you really welcomed us again, it was into a congregation that had obviously grown and changed in exactly some of the ways I'd hoped. Now, as you embark once more on the journey of uncertainty and hopefulness that is interim time, let me share again a few thoughts, both from 36 years in ministry and from these last few years back in your midst. First, I want to congratulate you on 13 years of shared ministry to this community with Paul. It was truly heartwarming for me to see on my return the increase in numbers and in activity. It was the dream of every interim minister. You were here, vibrant and committed, when Prop 8 needed a firm and defiant response. You not only served as ground zero for the opposition in Orange County, but then you celebrated with love and joy the marriage of your pastor and his husband. You have taken the cutting-edge theology that your founding pastor, Fred Plummer, bequeathed you and offered over and over again high-caliber speakers with challenging ideas like Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan, Amy Jill Levine, and Tracy Blackman. Your hearts have continued to ache for the disadvantaged and oppressed around you, and you put that into action through ministries like Friends of Orange County Detainees and events like the Blessing of a Quran. Our beautiful and talented choir has continued to make music past 2 directors and several accompanists, bringing genuine beauty into our midst week after week and for special occasions. All in all, you really deserve to give yourselves a round of applause. I'm serious. I mean it. This is what it means when Jesus says, "Those who love me will keep my word, and we will come and make our home with them." God is at home here. And if the poet said God has no hands but our hands, your hands and hearts have been doing the holy work of compassion and justice through these long years. And God's love has been made plain by your work and word. Now, before we settle down to rest on our laurels or the softer parts of our anatomy, 2, 3, 4. I need you to know that this does not mean we have arrived at the promised land. And all too often, that's what we humans do, all of us. We exert ourselves to achieve a lofty goal, right a wrong, make a difference. And when it's accomplished, we breathe a sigh of relief. We consider the glory of our handiwork, and we say to ourselves, "Self, you have done it. Now you deserve to take it easy. And there are all kinds of examples of that in our society. Civil rights laws get passed, and it's assumed that racism is banished. So it's a big deal with an old yearbook photo anyway. Those in poverty receive their meager SNAP handout, and others wonder why, in a world that runs on them, they might need cell phones and internet access. Gays and lesbians are finally free to marry, and they want protection for employment and housing too. Yeah, the line keeps moving, because we are always just short of the finish line. And every achievement opens up new chances for more complete justice. There's a story in the Gospels that we often read just before Lent begins. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John apart from the rest and goes up a mountain with them. And at the top, they seem to see Jesus in a whole new light, as if he were glowing, floating, surrounded by long-dead heroes of their faith, transformed from a mere human into something almost divine. We kind of had a moment of that last week, didn't we? It's as if all the hard work Jesus has done in the past 3 years has been validated. And Peter basically says, let's build a souvenir stand and just stay up here to bask in the glory of the moment while we tell the story over and over to whoever who happens to wander by. While down at the foot of the mountain, there is work to be done. There are people who need to be helped. You know, sometimes I think the reason the disciples were afraid when they heard the news that Jesus had risen wasn't from fear of ghosts or zombies or Roman soldiers who would accuse them of grave robbing. They were afraid because they knew that if Jesus was still alive, there was still work to be done. And their job wasn't over. No time for souvenir selling, not yet. So it is with us. After last week's deserved celebration of 13 years of ministry shared between you and Paul, for appropriate reasons, he has moved into another stage of his life. But you, us, the church's work isn't over. And I suspect there are tasks out there that few, if any, of us anticipate. I've been fortunate enough to have served several open and affirming congregations in the past, and one of the things each of them has encountered is someone they didn't expect to need to be open to, something they weren't quite ready to affirm. Many of you have welcomed in-laws into your families, partners of a son or daughter, as I have. And much as we love them, they're different, aren't they? Open Christmas presents on the night before? Canned cranberry jelly at Thanksgiving? What kind of people raised them? It's all very human. We gather a group of like-minded folks, create an atmosphere that affirms our values, and it holds those values front and center so we don't forget our commitments. And someone out there sees our values in action, feels affirmed, feels called to share in the labor, and decides to become part of us. And then, one day, they say or do something that leaves us with our mouths hanging open. Because our affirming, like-minded atmosphere allows us to forget or shortchange ideas, habits, parts of life that are all over the place out there. Just in here, not so much. Another story from the Gospels. Jesus has been working hard, healing, teaching, and he and the disciples decide to take a vacation. So they head north, out of their territory. And they're walking along the fields, by the coast, enjoying some peace and quiet, looking at the scenery. And a woman approaches. And somehow or other, she recognizes Jesus, or at least what he stands for. And she says, "My daughter is sick. And I know you can help her. Will you heal my daughter?" And he does what we all do. He ignores the email. He doesn't call back. The gospel says he said not a word. Maybe, if she thinks he didn't hear her, she'll go away. But of course she doesn't. And she says, "I'll try again. I have a sick child. Will you heal her?" And he gets a little testy. And he says, "Well, you see, back there, I've got a job. But here, I'm off. And I'm sorry, but that's the way it has to be. Healthy boundaries and all that." Nevertheless, you might say, she persisted. And he turns to her, and the word he uses is no nicer in English than in Hebrew, and she flinches. But then she says, "All right, you've talked about dogs crawling under the table. If you want me to crawl, I will gladly crawl because I love my daughter. Now for the last time, will you heal my child?" And in that moment, something happens. Something opens inside Jesus that he hadn't expected. And as she challenges his half-conscious and comfortable presumptions, he grows. Maybe not comfortably, but Jesus grows. The time ahead will call us to many things: to clarify our vision for the future, to strengthen our connections to one another, to respond to the assistance of our denomination in this process with greater reciprocal commitment to wider ministries. Interim time will ask us to re-up for the causes that have defined us, that still mean so much to us all, and in which we're still needed in the world around us. And it will likely present us with an opportunity to stretch, to question the habits and preconceptions we've fallen into, and to grow, especially in ways we wouldn't automatically think of and aren't sure we're ready for. How might that occur? For one example, just look around at each other. In comparison to the wider world, or just to Irvine, we're pretty homogeneous, aren't we? Pretty white, pretty educated, even reasonably stable financially. And there's, well, I know. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. If God declared the world good at its creation, I can't imagine that God doesn't want us to enjoy it and all its blessings. But as I said before, we're also fairly like-minded, with similar values and commitments, and the leaders we tend to choose look a lot like us. Your last 3 pastors, if you count my interim time, your last 3 pastors have been white men. So have your last 3 choir directors. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I know we want the best person for whatever the position is. But when we all look alike, and we all think alike, we tend to look for our next leaders in places we're familiar with, among people more or less just like us. And if that's the best person, so be it. But how do we know? If we haven't looked elsewhere at candidates with different backgrounds and outlooks, even different looks, even without the highest degree from the right school. And no, I'm not suggesting that it would be good for us or necessarily diverse if our next senior pastor were a Bible-thumping fundamentalist. But what if he were she or they? Or steeped in an African-American preaching tradition to go along with this morning's anthem? Or Asian or Latinx? What might someone different bring to the table as we continue our efforts to reach others in this diverse community? We say, no matter who you are, you're welcome here. But you know that making someone welcome is more than merely saying it. It's hard to feel welcome if no one else looks like you. This church's pastor and people have worked hard to make sure that LGBTQ persons have a place here where they are not just welcomed but included, not just present but participating at the deepest and highest levels. And you know it took conscious, conscientious, sustained effort for that welcome to be believed and accepted. But you also know what a symbol and a gift it has been for the past 13 years to have an out and married gay man as senior pastor. People notice. People notice what they can see. During the 1950s and 1960s, many white churches adopted specific provisions in their bylaws, welcoming people of all races and colors. It wasn't enough just to say, everybody's welcome. The invitation needed to be made specific and personally relevant. If we believe, and I know we do, that God has made all of us equal, how do we demonstrate that in our outreach and our welcoming? I think we do it first by realizing, confessing, that there are important gifts that might be brought. Gifts we can't get any other way than from someone female or trans or black or Latinx. I asked Brianna weeks ago to prepare the song from Disney's Pocahontas, and as problematic as the movie was in places, these lyrics express something important for us in this time. What I love most about rivers is you can't step in the same river twice. The water's always changing, always flowing. But people, I guess, can't live like that. We all must pay a price to be safe. We lose the chance of ever knowing what's around the river bend. It's an unsettled time, once again. And it's tempting to dig in, retrench, stick to the tried and true verities that got us here, the easy, comfy choices. that bring easy, comfy things. It's on the last night of his life, when things seemed uncertain at best, that Jesus says to his disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid." If we stay true to the word of justice and compassion that has come to us from Jesus, if we strive evermore to reach out and welcome in, then I believe we will find the giver of the dream in our midst, even as we make room for something new that's just around the river bend. Amen.
Amen.
Please join hands and let's sing our closing hallelujah.